I'd like to first start with some background about the British situation. Bovine spongiform encephalopathy, what a word. Dubbed mad cow disease by the British press, was first documented in 1986. Cows infected with this seemingly new disease appeared nervous, jumpy, twitchy, even became aggressive, responding to handling by kicking as their brains degenerated into this characteristic Swiss cheese-like appearance under the microscope, hence the name, bovine, cow or cattle, spongiform, sponge-like, encephalopathy, brain disease. And mad cow disease spread like wildfire, becoming the single most serious threat ever posed to British agriculture. But from a public health standpoint, the question was, well, wait a second, could this be passed along to people who ate infected meat? The British government initially denied such a link. They said that the number of cows that would get this disease would never number more than 20,000. They're only about an order of magnitude off, and that cows were probably the dead-end host, meaning that it wouldn't spread to other species. But then, in 1990, Max, someone's pet Siamese cat, died of a feline spongiform encephalopathy. You know, like the disease in cows, no one had ever seen anything like it in cats before. Infected pet food containing rendered cattle parts was considered overwhelmingly the most likely cause of Max's death. Infected food has since been blamed on the deaths of 80 more cats in Britain, and then dozens of zoo animals, antelopes, ostriches, monkeys started dropping dead with never-before-described spongiform encephalopathies. Didn't seem like a dead-end host to anyone. And then, in 1994, Vicky Rimmer, a 16-year-old schoolgirl in Wales, was diagnosed with the human spongiform encephalopathy, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, or CJD, is a human spongiform encephalopathy whose standard clinical picture is this relentlessly progressive and invariably fatal dementia. If you're lucky, you're mercifully dead in 6 months with the same kind of brain sponginess. Britain's health secretary has said it's very hard to imagine a worse form of death than CJD. Now, some may recognize this disease as that which claimed the life of renowned ballet choreographer George Balanchine. Well, that was seemingly before mad cow disease. See, this disease, CJD, seems to strike about 1 in a million people, perhaps spontaneously, but it usually attacks people in their 60s. Vicky was 16. It's like Alzheimer's striking a teenager. And so it was this new form of the disease striking young people, which caused the British government to reverse its decade-old stance that British beef was safe to eat. And ironically, that announcement was made on Meat Out Day, March 20th, 1996. And so they called this disease variant CJD to distinguish it from that 1 in a million CJD. And the evidence linking the new disease in cows, BSE, and this new disease in people, variant CJD, has been considered indisputable by the medical community. And so the first question, well, wait a second, could people get this disease by eating infected beef? That question has been answered undeniably, yes. Okay, well then the next question is, wait a second, how many people are going to die? Is it just going to be a few, or is there going to be a human epidemic? And that question has been answered as well, and the only remaining question is, how big of an epidemic are we likely to see? The incubation period, the time when you eat an infected burger and actually start showing symptoms right before you die for these kind of diseases, human spongiform encephalopathies like CJD, can be decades. An Oxford study published in Nature estimates that 500,000 infected cows were slaughtered for human consumption over in Britain. No one knows how many people in Britain are currently silently incubating this disease. Early on, the British Statistical Society came up with a possible worst-case scenario estimate of 18 million people dead before this was all over. Thankfully, that estimate has come down in recent years to thousands of human deaths rather than millions. Assuming 20-year incubation period, these young people, these few young people dying now, were presumably infected in the mid-'80s when there were but a few hundred mad cows. It's estimated that in 1990 alone, 250,000 infected animals were slaughtered for human consumption, which of course raises the question, how many people will be dying in the years to come? You know, the reason that so many infected cattle could enter into the human food supply is there's an incubation period in cattle as well. There's no pre-mortem test for BSE, meaning you can only kind of tell on autopsy whether or not a cow has it or not. And so infected animals harboring the disease could be slaughtered for human consumption before they ever started showing symptoms. In this way, mad cow disease might resemble AIDS, another deadly disease with a long incubation period. I mean, in general, it's not the people with full-blown AIDS that are passing the disease around. You know, it's people that are infected and infectious but appear perfectly fine. And in much the same way, the bulk of infected beef may have entered the food supply there from cattle who appeared perfectly healthy. And that's why just banning downer cows from human consumption here in the U.S. is not enough to protect the public. Along the same lines, the reason why 90% of the infected cattle in Britain were found among dairy cattle is they're actually allowed to live 6 or 7 years over in Britain before being retired into ground beef, whereas beef cattle are killed after 2 or 3 years, which allows them time to become infected, but they're slaughtered before many of them start showing symptoms. And because of that, it may actually even be harder to prevent infected cattle from entering the human food supply here in the U.S. because we routinely slaughter our cattle much earlier than done over in Europe. So, for example, less than half of U.S. dairy cattle make it past their 4th birthday. We Americans eat 2.6 billion pounds of ground beef from these retired dairy cows every year. I didn't bring my slides today, but I got this great slide. It's an advertisement in Feed Management magazine. It has a picture of a dairy cow with the caption, "I need all the feed I can get. I am, after all, 2 of the 4 basic food groups." Unquote. Unlike AIDS, though, the type of infectious agent thought to cause these diseases seems new. Not a virus, not a fungus, not a bacteria, but thought to be a prion, an infectious protein. No one really knows exactly how they even replicate. It's been called the strangest thing in all biology. In fact, the very concept of prions challenges what's called the central dogma of biology, which I'd, of course, be happy to talk about if people are interested. But because of their unique structure, they are practically invulnerable. They can exist for years in the soil. They're not adequately destroyed by cooking, canning, freezing, usable doses of UV or ionizing radiation, stomach acid, digestive enzymes, all ineffective in destroying their infectivity. Even heat sterilization, domestic bleach, and formaldehyde sterilization all have little or no effect. One study even raised the disturbing question whether or not even incineration could guarantee the inactivation of prions. The guy who did that study, Dr. Paul Brown, medical director for the U.S. Public Health Service, found infectivity after reducing sample to ash, after incineration at temperatures hot enough to melt lead, still found infectivity. He's quoted as saying that prions are probably the single most resistant organism on the face of the earth.